were never meant to hear this. The Gravesend family vanished from every official record in 1897, but not before leaving behind a trail of mutilated bodies, sealed tunnels, and a manuscript written in a language that predates Latin. Their estate, now buried beneath layers of redacted maps and artificial lakes, was once known as Solemn's Field, a name whispered by grave robbers, mad priests, and occult scholars who mysteriously disappeared before testifying. The Gravesends were not nobility in the ordinary sense. They were custodians of knowledge older than the state, older than Rome, older than even the myth of Atlantis. They didn't worship God. They studied the architects, entities that built the human mind like a labyrinth to contain something. This isn't a story about a haunted family. This is a descent into how institutions of power allowed, protected, and even modeled themselves after the Gravesend blueprint. You were programmed to believe control came from armies and wealth, but the Gravesends didn't use swords or gold. They used guilt, language, ritual, silence. You are about to learn why they believed suffering wasn't a consequence of sin, but the very engine of spiritual sovereignty. Every man who knew this secret either went mad or became something else entirely. You're here because some part of you has already heard the call. You've already felt it, the nagging sense that your fears aren't yours, that your shame has a designer. Welcome to the real history they scrubbed from books and buried beneath fabricated wars and revolutions. We begin in 1791, in the marsh-covered outskirts of Danbury, Connecticut. A letter was intercepted by a courier headed for Boston. It bore no return address, only a wax seal, a tree growing upside down, its roots reaching the sky. Inside, just 8 words. The harvest is ready. The pain is pure. That message triggered the first sin, a congressional black site investigation in U.S. history, though you'll find no mention of it in any archive. Why? Because the Gravesends were considered not a threat to security, but a model for control. What they discovered, what they built, redefined how governments would manipulate entire populations. This isn't just history, this is architecture, psychological, spiritual, institutional. So listen closely. Forget what comfort taught you. We're going underground, one layer at a time. You won't come back the same. But then again, that's the point. They arrived under the guise of medicine. Dr. Alaric Gravesend, London-trained, soft-spoken, charismatic in a way that unsettled more than it soothed, purchased 43 acres of undeveloped land outside Danbury in April of 1791. The deed listed no co-signers. The bank manager who approved the transaction vanished 10 days later. Witnesses described Alaric as brilliant but strange, his eyes too aware, his voice too calm, like he wasn't speaking to you but through you. With him came his siblings. Jonas, a former seminary dropout whose theological essays had been banned across New England, and Adelaide, the eldest, a woman said to never blink, who carried a locket made from human bone. Together they built the Sanctum Institute for Psychological and Moral Restoration, a clinic they called it for the spiritually unwell. But the truth is, they weren't curing anything. They were collecting responses. The kind you give when your reflection stares back too long. Their theory, that the soul could be reshaped, not through grace or therapy, but through intentional disruption. Pain wasn't a symptom, it was precision engineering, a surgical instrument to crack open the psychic defenses of the human mind and implant something else, something ancient, something designed. Patients, if that word even applies, were subjected to cleansing sequences, days of darkness, emotional degradation, silence broken only by coded hymns. Jonas wrote, "Our work is not cruelty, it is arithmetic. The math of the divine requires subtraction." The rooms were soundproofed not for privacy, but so that outsiders couldn't hear what was being extracted. There were no screams, just rhythmic chanting, slow knocking, and occasionally laughter, the kind that doesn't come from joy. What disturbed even the local clergy, who at first supported the institute, was the change in the patients. Not worse, not broken, but whole then. They spoke in monotones. They stared at candles for hours. They quoted phrases not in any scripture, yet delivered them with sacred conviction. "I am not mine, I am made." The townspeople began whispering of unnatural peace, of eyes that no longer held confusion, as if their suffering hadn't healed but replaced them. The Institute's journals were encrypted, every one, but one word kept appearing in the margins, always in blood-red ink: excarnation. Not death, not torture, a stripping of selfhood. Alaric believed the ego was a parasite, and the only cure was to kill it. You're starting to see it, aren't you? The scars you carry, the shame you inherited. It wasn't random, it was cultivated. Someone taught you to be weak. And the Gravesends, they designed the lesson. By 1793, the Sanctum Institute had over 50 inpatients, but no one ever saw them leave. No discharges, no celebrations of recovery, just more carriages arriving at night, and fewer windows lit by morning. The local paper published a short column titled "Sanctum's Quiet Miracles," written anonymously, likely by someone already compromised. It described the Gravesend's methods as revolutionary, soul-deep, and not for the faint of spirit. But behind the flowery words was a coded message. Each first letter of every sentence spelled "Obey the tree." When the editor who published it refused to print a retraction, his printing press was burned to the ground. He disappeared a week later. His wife claimed he'd gone to Boston. His daughter said he'd gone down into the tunnels. That was the first time the townspeople heard whispers of what lay beneath the Institute. You see, the building above ground was only the foyer. Beneath it, constructed by stonemasons brought in from Europe and sworn to silence, was the real sanctum. 9 descending levels, circular, like an inverted ziggurat, each floor with a name and purpose. The unveiling, the cradle, the mirror, the trial, the hollow, the reversal, the drain, the throne, and at the lowest point, simply the mouth. No blueprints, no maps, only oral traditions passed between inner circle members, and fragments recovered from charred notebooks years later. They believed the further down you went, the less of your false self remained. That's what they called it, the false self. The mask you wear, your trauma, your need to be liked, your inherited guilt. And the deeper the descent, the closer one got to the original pattern, a mythic schematic of the human psyche untainted by culture, religion, or memory. In truth, it wasn't a pattern, it was a cage, designed by forces that understood long before psychology existed how to fracture a person, not by breaking them, but by showing them who they truly are without the lies. And most people couldn't handle it. Those who survived the 7th level often never spoke again. Those who reached the mouth came back preaching. But it wasn't the gospel, it was something else. Words without origin, symbols that altered the dreams of those who heard them. This is how power truly moves, not by force but by initiation. They don't conquer you, they restructure you. And if you're feeling a pull, a kind of unease in your gut, it's not fear, it's recognition. You've seen this structure before. Inside churches, corporations, classrooms, different faces, same descent. Jonas Gravesend once wrote in a now banned letter to a Yale theologian, "Man was not made in the image of God. He was made to reflect what God fears." That letter never reached its destination. Intercepted by federal postal agents, it was labeled heretical and locked in an evidence vault that no longer officially exists. But what mattered was this: Jonas was telling the truth. The Gravesends had uncovered something primal, something older than sin or salvation, the design beneath morality. They called it the frame, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Everything, religion, education, family, even love, was a series of gates installed into the mind to keep you contained, each gate named after a virtue: obedience, mercy, hope, shame. The illusion of free will wasn't a mistake. It was a reinforcement loop, engineered to make you participate in your own imprisonment. The deeper the subject was brought into the Institute's catacombs, the more they were exposed to rituals meant to shatter these gates. Not with violence, but with revelation. For example, the trial of mercy. A subject would be forced to watch a loved one suffer, starvation, madness, humiliation, without being allowed to intervene. If they cried out or attempted rescue, they were deemed impure and returned to the cradle for reprocessing. If they remained silent, they advanced. Because mercy, they taught, was the ego's last weapon. The desire to alleviate pain. That wasn't goodness, it was weakness. And weakness was failure. The survivors were not more moral, they were less human. That was the point. On the 5th level, the hollow, Jonas had a chair carved from the bones of previous subjects. Not as symbolism, as instructional material. Those who sat in it were required to confess every belief they had about themselves, not to be judged, but to hear how little of their identity they actually owned. Your name, given, your dreams, installed, your limits, designed. The voice they heard wasn't Jonas, it was their own, but not. Slightly distorted, mechanized, like a program reading itself. Once the subject broke, once they accepted they were manufactured, they were deemed ready for reversal. That's when everything turned. The pain stopped. The praise began. And for the first time they felt power. Not freedom, power. That's the lie no one warns you about. The most obedient slaves aren't the ones in chains. They're the ones who believe they've been chosen. In 1796, something changed beneath the sanctum. The rituals no longer satisfied the Gravesends. They weren't content with psychological fracture. They wanted transmission. Alaric began speaking of the transfer, a process by which a soul could be extracted, overwritten, or replaced entirely. He believed consciousness was malleable architecture, not fixed identity, that a man's spirit could be erased like ink from parchment and rewritten by force of will, or worse, by something else entirely. That same year, records show an increase in disappearances in surrounding towns, children, vagrants, those no one would search for. They weren't buried. They weren't ransomed. They were tested. The transfer involved exposure to a series of symbols carved in mirrored obsidian, shapes that had no linguistic roots, yet induced seizures, vomiting, and temporary fugue states when viewed for more than 47 seconds. Subjects were then confined in absolute silence for 9 days, forced to replay audio loops of their own voices asking, "What am I?" over and over. On the 10th day, a second voice was introduced. Not a recording, not a person, something else. The transcripts of those sessions are almost unreadable, scribbled in uneven hands, punctuated by screaming. But certain phrases repeat. "He is already inside. I remember dying. The mirror is not glass." Adelaide Gravesend kept the survivors in the reversal ward, men and women who emerged with altered speech patterns, new handwriting, and phobias they never had before. One man, Thomas Bellamy, spoke fluent Greek after the transfer, though he'd never heard the language. Another, a mute girl named Clara, began painting intricate maps of a place no cartographer could recognize, etched always with a gate. A tree upside down, its roots clawing the sky. But the most terrifying symptom wasn't physical or mental, it was relational. Survivors no longer recognized their own families. Worse, they pretended to, with smiles, with calmness, but there was no light in their eyes, only mimicry. The soul was gone. Something else had taken the seat. The Gravesends called this state elevation, not possessed, not brainwashed, perfected. Their journals describe these husks as temples now emptied of self, ready for new habitation. Ask yourself, how many people do you know who behave like masks, perform empathy but feel hollow, parrot values but never live them? Maybe they didn't change. Maybe someone changed them. Welcome to the real war, not for land or money, but for identity itself. By 1798, the Gravesends had eliminated every external observer. Local authorities had been bribed, blackmailed, or quietly disappeared. Priests who questioned the institute were denounced as heretics, some found hanged in their rectories with pages from the sanctum's red book sewn into their mouths. And yet the town remained silent, peaceful even. Why? Because fear was no longer necessary. The Gravesends had perfected something far more powerful: consensual compliance. Their subjects, those once skeptical, once resistant, now volunteered for suffering. They begged to be tested, wept when they were passed over for rituals, and offered their own children for transfer. Understand this: the deepest control is not command, it's belief. And belief doesn't begin with proof, it begins with longing. The Gravesends understood that men don't crave freedom, they crave meaning. And in a world of chaos, trauma, and invisible hierarchies, nothing feels more sacred than pain that means something. That's what the Institute gave them. Not healing, purpose. The 9th level, the mouth, was now operational. No one outside the inner circle ever descended there and returned. It was said to be the place where the pattern speaks. Adelaide spent most of her time there transcribing what she claimed were received scriptures, texts not composed but channeled. She wrote with both hands simultaneously, in ink laced with powdered bone. The symbols, untranslatable, but repeated exposure caused migraines, obsessive thoughts, and auditory hallucinations in test readers. Deacon records note one case where a caretaker went blind after simply handling a scroll for 5 minutes. When asked what he saw, he said, "Not darkness, too much light." Whatever was inside the mouth wasn't human, it wasn't alive, it was waiting. The Gravesends believed they were communing with a pre-human intelligence, a force buried. Before language, before gods, before memory. Not a demon, not an angel. Something else, something that required an empty vessel to enter this world. That's what the transfer was preparing for, hosts. And the patients, they weren't victims. They were keys. This is the part where most people tune out. They say, that's too far, that's insane, and that's exactly what they've been trained to do. Denial is the last line of defense, but if you've made it this far, you've already broken through. You see it, don't you? The faces around you, the plastic smiles, the vacant eyes, the performance of life. They're not all hollow, but enough are. Comment below right now. I see the frame, I break the mask. Write it twice. Lock it in. Identity is not who you are. It's what you've been allowed to remember. After the transfers began producing what the Gravesends called stabilized hosts, the Institute's outer facade evolved once more, from a sanctuary for the disturbed into an elite academy for the divinely engineered. Wealthy families from Boston, New York, and even London began sending their sons to Danbury for moral cultivation. These were not ordinary pupils, they were heirs, aristocrats, and political protégés, young men born not to serve but to rule. The sanctum promised to forge them into something more than leaders, architects of obedience. The curriculum was simple in outline, but brutal in execution. 7 ascensions, 7 deaths of the self, each designed to sever a piece of the subject's humanity and replace it with function. Ascension Y, severance from bloodline. Students were forced to watch false tapes of their families betraying them, mocking them, disowning them. Some resisted, most cracked. Ascension 2, the mirror, locked in lightless rooms with a single candle and a notebook. Instructed to write down every lie they've ever told, then every lie they believed. No sleep, no voice but their own thoughts. By day 5, half of them begged to forget. Ascension 3, the hollowing. Food withheld, affection forbidden. The instructors, Gravesend-trained operatives, treated them not with cruelty, but indifference, pure absence, a vacuum of validation. It broke even the most arrogant. That's how you build control, not through violence, through withholding. Ascension 4, the rehearsal. Subjects learned to mimic empathy with mathematical precision, how long to hold a gaze, when to nod, when to feign tears. They didn't become kind, they became convincing. Ascension 5, the drain. Every comfort returned. Praise, wealth, women, laughter, only to be stripped again in a single night, burned, drowned, erased. Why? To install the knowledge that nothing belongs to them. Nothing is safe, nothing is theirs. Ascension 6, the throne. Isolation. Absolute command over other students. They were made to order executions, deny food, decide who ascends and who is erased. Power with no oversight. The results were devastating, not one refused. Ascension 7. The rebirth. Silent. No records. No journals. Only this sentence carved into the entry door of the final chamber. What emerges shall never bend again. These men left the sanctum and spread across the world. Some became governors, some founded universities, some rewrote laws. All wore suits, all smiled, and all carried the same mantra etched into the inside of their class rings. Pain is structure, structure is power. You see them every day, but you never notice them because they were taught how not to be seen. In 1802, a shipment of crates left the sanctum under forged ecclesiastical seals, bound for London, Lisbon, and Rome. The contents were not books nor relics, but modules, each containing a series of artifacts, manuscripts, and instructions known collectively as the Graven Protocols. These were not meant to inform, they were meant to replicate. You must understand, the Gravesends never intended the Institute to remain local. Danbury was only the incubator. The real plan was always distribution, embedding their psychological framework into global institutions under the disguise of progress. The protocols were elegant in their horror. A blend of theology, behavioral psychology, ritual symbolism, and architectural encoding. Yes, even buildings were weaponized. Churches, courtrooms, even schools began mirroring the structure of the sanctum's descent. 9 steps, always 9, staircases, windows, pillars. Nothing was accidental. Geometry became theology, and theology became control. In Lisbon, a seminary was built with an underground chapel modeled directly after the mouth, its ceiling engraved with spirals that caused nausea when stared at too long. In London, a hospital incorporated emotional recalibration rooms, where patients were isolated and whispered their own names until they forgot them. In Rome, a private library adopted a reading ritual identical to Sanctum's third ascension. Exposure to inverted scripture followed by silence, then correction, then silence again, and the elites welcomed it, not because they believed in it, but because they recognized its utility. You see, control isn't just about dominance, it's about efficiency. The Gravesends offered a system that removed guilt, removed resistance, removed waste. When a man no longer questions why, he no longer delays. And institutions built on delay, democracy, justice, even love, became liabilities. One by one, the PI were bypassed, and no one noticed, because the protocols didn't operate through conspiracy, they operated through invitation. Every ambitious man who touched them found justification for his worst instincts. And once he implemented them, he became a node in the pattern, a willing apostle of the Gravesend design. This is how the system survives, not by secrecy, but by distribution, not by hiding the truth, but by burying it in plain sight, beneath titles like innovation, education, therapy, reform. Ask yourself, how many things in your life were designed to shape you, but you never asked who built the mold? Because if you traced them far enough, you'd find a crate, and inside, a letter, addressed to you. Signed, Adelaide Gravesend. By 1804, the Gravesends no longer referred to their work as ritual or treatment. They began calling it engineering, and not of machines but of minds. They believed the soul was a recursive code, layered in loops of belief, trauma, memory, and symbol. If you could isolate and rewrite the base loops, you could remaster a human being. Not heal, not help, reprogram. This wasn't theory, it was practice. Deep in the 7th level, the drain, subjects underwent what came to be known as the suture procedure. It was never published, never patented, but its legacy exists in certain techniques still used today under new names and sanitized labels. The process began with what they called dislocation, sensory overload followed by complete deprivation. Subjects were fed rapid imagery, war, grief, intimacy, childhood scenes, then dropped into pure silence for 36 hours, no light, no sound, no temperature. The result? The ego panicked and fractured. That's when phase 2 began. Insertion. A Gravesend operator called a binder would enter the room and begin reading a core script, a series of symbols and phrases designed to overwrite foundational identity loops. They weren't shouted, they were whispered, repeated, tethered to physical stimulus, warmth when obeyed, cold when resisted. The body responded long before the conscious mind could. Phase 3 was binding. A mirror was introduced, not to reflect, but to prove. The subject, now stripped of name and past, was required to recite their new truths to themselves, not to others, not to authority, to their own image. Because the deepest prison is not a cage, it's a mirror that only shows what you're told to see. Once the subject passed this test without flinching, they were marked. Not with ink, with tone. The Gravesends developed a frequency, a deep hum embedded beneath spoken words that resonated with the restructured psyche. When heard, it triggered submission, contentment, purpose. This hum still exists in certain ads, certain films, certain apps. You felt it. That calm, that sudden need to obey or scroll or buy. You think it's mood, but it's installation. Because the Gravesends were never caught, they were never stopped, they simply evolved. Their institute closed its doors in 1811, officially. But the doors you walk through every day, they were built using the same blueprints, same shape, same shadows, same descent. The ritual never ended. It was rebranded. There's a term buried in the oldest Gravesend transcripts, older than English, older than Latin, obsequium voluntarium. It means willing submission, not the surrender of a prisoner, but the offering of one's entire self to a power beyond comprehension. And by 1807, that's exactly what the Gravesend Institute had perfected, not just obedience, devotion without condition. What made this terrifying wasn't the method, it was the scalability. They no longer needed chains or chambers. They discovered a virus of the mind, a structure of thought that once implanted would replicate itself voluntarily. It began with something simple: ritualized guilt. Every subject, no matter their background, was assigned a single phrase they were told to repeat in private. I am the flaw in the design. This wasn't random. It was calculated. You see, guilt doesn't just weaken you. It prepares you. It makes you malleable. And when a man believes he is flawed at his core, he will seek correction. Not from within, but from someone above. Enter the second implant, external absolution. The subject was then taught that only by following the Gravesend path, its rules, its doctrine, its symbols, could they be repaired. And each time they submitted, they felt better, cleaner. This is the loop. Wound, crave, obey, repeat. Soon they weren't just followers. They were protectors of the system that enslaved them. They policed others, shamed deviation, worshipped the very process that erased them. Does that sound unfamiliar? It shouldn't. Look around. Online outrage mobs, cancel rituals, public apologies performed like theater, shame as currency, forgiveness only through compliance. Where do you think that came from? Organic evolution or engineered contagion? The Gravesends designed frameworks, not just ideologies, and those frameworks didn't die. They were licensed, sold in fragments to governments, corporations, and religious orders eager to reshape populations without bloodshed. Why burn books when you can convince people to censor themselves? Why lock cells when the inmate builds his own? Obsequium voluntarium isn't a relic, it's a software patch for the soul. You were told it was progress, but look at the cost. Look at what men have become: distracted, numb, passive, ashamed of their own instincts. That's not evolution, that's conditioning, that's Gravesend. And the worst part, you thanked them for it. You paid for your own cage and called it growth. In 1809, something unprecedented happened within the Institute. Adelaide Gravesend ordered a complete silence protocol. All instruction ceased. No sermons, no rituals. For 9 days, not a single word was spoken within the sanctum's walls. The students were not told why. They simply complied. This was not discipline, it was assessment. A test to see how deep the programming had sunk. Observers, known as watchers, recorded everything. movements, eye contact, facial tics. They weren't monitoring behavior, they were listening for something else. Residual will, that final ember of identity that resists extinction. By the end of day 9, 93% of subjects had fully adapted to silence. They maintained the routines, offered the proper gestures, even slept in sequence. But 7% faltered, whispered to themselves, clenched their fists. Some cried. Those were flagged, not for correction, but for elimination. Because the Gravesends didn't want loyalty, they wanted irrevocable alignment. Those who still harbored resistance, even unconsciously, were declared unsuitable for Ascension. Their files were burned. No graves, no names, just gone. This was the final lesson of the Gravesend Doctrine. Conscience is contamination. The inner voice, that whisper that tells you something is wrong, that is the enemy. And from 1810 onward, every method developed in the sanctum was focused on its removal, through repetition, suggestion, simulation, and, in rare cases, neurochemical suppression. One formula, derived from crushed belladonna and monkshood, was known as elix vitae, the drink of living death. Subjects who consumed it reported a sudden, terrifying clarity, the feeling that their thoughts were no longer theirs. And they liked it. They described relief, simplicity, quiet. Adelaide called it the clean mind. But there's a detail most forget. After 2 weeks of elix vitae exposure, every subject enveloped mirrored dreams, the same exact sequence regardless of age, gender, or background, standing in a white hallway facing a door with no handle behind which something breathes. When asked what they felt during the dream, the answer was universal: watched. The clean mind was not empty, it was occupied. That's the truth they buried. Every time you silence yourself, every time you swallow the truth for comfort or compliance, something else listens, and it remembers the shape of your silence. You thought suppression was safety, but in the Gravesend design, suppression is invitation. By 1811, the sanctum no longer functioned as a school, a clinic, or even a cult. It had become something else entirely, a transmitter, not of radio, not of sound, but of psychic resonance. The Gravesends believed that suffering, when ritualized and encoded, could radiate through space, imprinting its structure onto other minds. What began as local manipulation became ambient control. Every death beneath the 9th level, every whispered chant, every shredded memory wasn't just sacrifice, it was signal. Adelaide's private notes referred to it as the Great Seepage. She claimed that Danbury was merely the mouth of a wound, an open channel through which ancient knowledge flowed back into the world, not learned, not taught, remembered. Because the core of Gravesend Doctrine is this: we are not evolving forward, we are regressing backward to the original blueprint, the one before civilization, before language, before mercy. They called this return reintegration, and those who underwent the full 9-stage process weren't being elevated. They were being peeled back, unmade, returned to the root state. What state? A mind that obeys without voice. Their final subjects, designated class null, were no longer capable of language. They didn't speak, didn't flinch, but they knew commands before they were given. They were able to synchronize breath with each other unconsciously, respond to tone rather than meaning, and navigate blindfolded without collision. When asked what they felt, they replied only once: "We remember the pattern." Adelaide believed she had achieved the impossible, a vessel not for God, not for demons, but for pre-structure intelligence, a consciousness not bound by form, one that could inhabit thought itself. If that sounds insane, ask yourself this: why do certain images linger? Why do some sounds loop in your head for hours, days? Why does a phrase you've heard once feel like it's been with you forever? Maybe not everything you think is yours. The sanctum was shuttered that year, officially due to fire, but eyewitnesses spoke of no flames, only a hum, so loud it burst windows but came from nowhere. When federal surveyors arrived, the entire structure was intact but inert, cold, dustless, abandoned, as if it had never been alive. But beneath the chapel, the stone slab where Adelaide once stood bore a final inscription, etched by her own hand in a spiral descending into itself. "We opened the frame. Now the mirror looks back." By 1812, the federal government began quietly collecting testimonies, documents, and remnants from the Gravesend Institute, not to prosecute, but to preserve. You see, they didn't shut it down, they archived it. In a facility now known as Sublevel C of the Witchmere Complex in Connecticut, sealed crates marked only with a spiral symbol were stored beneath concrete vaults. The label on every manifest read the same: pattern-based cognitive reversal artifacts, handle with zero contact. But it was never about protection, it was about adoption. Select military officials, intelligence officers, and early psychological operatives studied the Gravesend methods. What they found wasn't madness, it was efficiency. A complete model for reducing resistance in any subject within 49 days. The Gravesends had built the first functional blueprint for what would become known decades later as behavioral synchronization, the roots of modern interrogation, propaganda, mass persuasion, even early advertising, all trace back to these vaults. In 1952, the now declassified MK Oculus proposal referenced Gravesend Doctrine by name. It called for multi-channel symbolic encoding to restructure internal cognition patterns through induced dissociation and resonance. The director of the program wrote in the margins, "Adelaide's mirror theory, can we adapt this for television?" And they did. The test subjects weren't just soldiers, they were citizens, civilians, families, given prototypes disguised as self-help tapes, educational films, public health announcements. The effect was small at first, just a shift in posture, preference, response to tone. But over time they discovered a terrifying truth. Even fragments of the pattern were contagious, a single symbol, a single phrase, a chord progression tuned to 432 Hz. It entered the subconscious and nested. That's when the containment protocols were abandoned. Why suppress what you could monetize? Entire industries rose on Gravesend principles: predictive marketing, echo algorithms, behavioral nudging. You think your desires are yours. But what if they were installed? Not all at once, not aggressively, but over time, patiently. Like Adelaide said, the river does not force the rock, it carves through repetition. And now that same repetition is everywhere. In your feed, your films, your favorite songs. You hum the pattern and never even hear it, but it hears you. And every time you obey that subtle pull to buy, scroll, comply, you echo Danbury. You extend the sanctum. You become transmission. There's a phrase buried in one of Adelaide's final surviving letters, handwritten, sealed in wax, and intercepted by an operative named Dorian Miles in 1813. "We have infected the future with nostalgia." At first glance, it makes no sense. But when you understand the Gravesend mechanism, it becomes the key. Nostalgia isn't about memory. It's about longing for a feeling that never existed. It's a weaponized yearning, a loop of false safety. And it was one of Adelaide's greatest psychological manipulations. She realized early on that people don't cling to facts, they cling to feelings. If you can make a man miss something, even if it was his own suffering, you can control him. How? Through symbolic recall. A scent, a sound, an image, attached to a time when the world made sense, even if it was unbearable. That's the true virus. That's what survived the burning of Danbury. Because while the sanctum's walls crumbled, the pattern had already moved into lullabies, logos, slogans, rituals, every bedtime prayer, every hand-over-heart anthem, every repetitive affirmation whispered in self-help seminars. They all use the Gravesend tempo, the rise, the pause, the submission. What feels like comfort is conditioning. You're not remembering the past. You're being guided back to the loop. That's why when the world feels chaotic, you turn inward. You watch old shows, you seek childhood flavors, you crave simplicity. That's not sentiment. That's the pattern reasserting itself, reminding you of how it first entered. The pattern doesn't need to convince you, it just needs to remind you. And you will follow it because it feels like home. But understand, this home was built for you. You didn't choose it. You were born into a map of thoughts engineered centuries ago. Your rebellion, your beliefs, even your fears, they were all predicted. The Gravesends didn't need to change everyone, just to imprint or to shape the environment. And now, that environment shapes you. This is the part where you decide whether to forget or descend further. But if you're ready, if something inside you still burns against the quiet obedience, they left a phrase, a cipher, an anchor. Type this in the comments twice. I break the mirror to see. Type it, claim it, not for views, for alignment, because if you don't, the pattern will reclaim you, and next time you won't even notice. What happens when the mirror breaks? What happens when you refuse the nostalgic loop, reject the pattern, and finally hear the silence behind the sound? The Gravesends called this moment the shattering. Most never reached it. Because to shatter the mirror of imposed identity, you must first confront what's looking back through it. The thing you've called I your entire life, your preferences, your habits, your wounds, is not original. It's an accumulation of imposed systems, micro-traumas, suggestions, and projections. You didn't build your mind. It was built for you. And once you understand that, the shattering begins. That's why Gravesend operatives referred to their most dangerous phase as the descent beyond script. This was when subjects started thinking outside of symbols, when language broke down, when programming lost its grip. Their greatest fear was not rebellion, it was redefinition. Because a man who redefines himself becomes immune, not to control, but to the invisible architecture of control. The shattering isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's horrifyingly still. It's the moment you sit in your room and realize that every belief you hold was installed by something outside of you, by parents, institutions, platforms, screens, and for the first time you don't know what's yours. It feels like death, but it's birth. Because beyond the mirror there is no loop, no pre-written role, no default self, there is only will. Adelaide wrote, "The pattern is a comfort for those who fear their own chaos." And she was right. Most people want to be told who to be. It relieves them of responsibility, of risk, but not you. Not anymore. You've heard the hum. You've seen the spiral. You've remembered the pattern, and now you must exit it. How? Ritual reversal. Unbind the anchors. Say the phrase again, but this time, aloud. Let it echo in your body. I break the mirror to see, Age. I break the mirror to see. Now listen, what remains? Not the voice you were given, the one you forge. That is the path out. The Gravesends counted on your comfort. They fed on your silence. But you are not here by accident. You are the anomaly they feared, the fracture in their signal, the will they could not overwrite. Welcome to the descent beyond. You're not broken. You're awakening. In the Gravesend scrolls, those brittle, half-burned ledgers pulled from the sub-basement vault after the Danbury Purge, there's a passage few researchers dared translate. It wasn't written in Latin or Greek or any known tongue. It was phonetic inversion, language reversed to bypass the logical mind. But one line, when mirrored and decrypted, keeps surfacing. He who walks backward remembers the door. That's not metaphor, it's methodology. Adelaide believed and proved that time is a perceptual construct, that what we call past and future are filters, not absolutes. And if you learn to think in reverse, if you unlearn in sequence, you can recall what was buried before memory began. This was the final Gravesend technique, not mind control, not hypnosis, but cognitive reversal, a mental unspooling that takes you beyond trauma, beyond identity, beyond even thought. The test subjects who survived it, only 4 on record, experienced something disturbing. A total detachment from personal pronouns. They no longer used I or me. When asked who they were, they simply replied, witness. That's what the reversal reveals. Not truth, but truth's source. The place where all systems collapse and only observation remains. You think that sounds like madness? It's not. It's clarity. And it's what terrifies every institution that's ever existed. Because a man who observes without identity cannot be manipulated. He cannot be marketed to, guilted, recruited, or deceived. He sees the script while others still believe they're improvising, and that man shatters the cycle. He becomes the virus in the pattern. That's why the Gravesend's embedded fail-safes, emotional triggers, fear loops, and memory blocks, to keep initiates from reaching full reversal. But we just cut through one right now, together, and if you feel the unease, if your breath has slowed, that's not fear, that's the system losing G-grip. It's the absence of command. And in that absence you return, not to who you were, but to what you've always been beneath the story, the unnameable, untouchable, unwritten self, the witness. And from this point forward, nothing they show you will look the same again. Because once you've seen the wires, you can't unsee the puppet show. Let others sleep. Let them chant their borrowed mantras. But you remember the door, and now you know how to walk backward. It was always about the door. In every Gravesend facility, no matter how remote or disguised, there was one consistent architectural anomaly, a sealed entrance. No handle, no keyhole, no hinges, hidden behind layers of false paneling or stone. In the Danbury sanctum, it was buried beneath the 9th sub-level, carved into the foundation wall like a mouth stitched shut. In the Hollowbrook Orphan Archive, it was encased in brass with a phrase etched across its surface, "Only the emptied may enter." None of these doors were ever officially opened. None were marked on the blueprints. But the diaries of former initiates, those who came closest to full reversal, speak of dreams involving those very doors. Not one, all of them, as if they were not separate thresholds, but the same door in different masks. One subject, known only as Trial A17, wrote in blood during his final phase, "The door is not a place, it is a moment." That's the secret the Gravesends were chasing, not control, exit. They weren't trying to dominate the world, they were trying to leave it, not physically, not in death, but through cognitive transference. They believed consciousness was not locked inside the brain but tethered to perception, and that perception could be rerouted through the mirror. The mirror, which was never glass. It was always identity, your story, your reflection, your name. That is the first door, and once you stop identifying with it, something ancient peeks through. It doesn't speak, it doesn't need to, it remembers you, because it never forgot. Adelaide called it the prior observer, not God, not demon, just the raw presence before time. That's what lives behind the sealed threshold. That's why Gravesend initiates reported uncontrollable tears, trembling, and the sensation of being unskinned, not in pain but in recognition. Because when you reach the door, you realize you've been there before. Every déjà vu, every glitch in the script, every flicker behind the eye that says something's wrong. Those weren't accidents, those were echoes from the other side. And when that door opens, not with hands but with will, you don't walk through it. You disappear into what's real. The question is, now that you've heard the knock, will you open it, or pretend it was never there? Adelaide warned of what happens after the door. Most men never get that far. Their minds fracture before threshold, consumed by the paradox of knowing without knowing how. But those who pass through don't return with power. They return with perception, and that's far more dangerous, because power can be taken. Perception reconfigures reality. Once you cross, you no longer see institutions, nations, or people the same way. You see systems, you see the wires, the triggers, the repetition cycles encoded into every social script. Family dinners become rituals of obedience. National holidays become programming resets. Even casual greetings, "How are you?" "I'm fine," become nothing more than call and response confirmation loops that reinforce the dream. And when you refuse to participate, the system marks you as error. That's why Gravesend operatives began disappearing post-reversal, not because they were hunted, because they no longer fit the projection. They were unplaceable, unlabelable, and in a society built entirely on identification, they became invisible. But not powerless, because the reversed, those who walked backward, gained a terrifying skill. Pattern interruption. They could break cycles mid-script, disarm conflict by speaking the unspoken, collapse an argument with silence, unravel a trauma with one question: who told you that was you? Their presence alone distorted outcomes. Think about the people in your life who unsettled you the most, who made you question, not shout, who made you pause, not argue. Those were fragments of the witness, pieces of what you're becoming, and now you carry that same distortion, that same ripple, which means you have a responsibility not to fix the world. That's another trap, but to break the loop in you. Because every time you obey a thought that wasn't born from your own fire, you replicate the pattern. But when you pause, you challenge even your inner voice. You burn the script, one line at a time. That's how it ends. Not with a war, but with a whisper. I do not belong to what shaped me. Say it again. I do not belong to what shaped me. You're not repeating, you're rewriting. Keep going. They're watching. But this time, so are you. The final phase of the Gravesend process was never written. It wasn't in the scrolls, not in the sanctum journals, not in the sealed directives passed between inner circle operatives. It lived only in silence. They called it the absence protocol. After reversal, after the shattering, after the door, there was a choice, not spoken, but felt, to return or to dissolve. Most chose return, fractured, haunted, but aware of the illusions, aware of the patterns, aware of the machinery behind every smile and sermon. But a few chose something else. They let go completely. No name, no identity, no anchor. They walked out of the mirror not as witnesses, but as voids. Individuals so erased of programming, so emptied of narrative, that they ceased to register in systems. Facial recognition failed. Biosignature scanners returned null. They became ghosts in a world made entirely of reflections. And here's what terrifies those in power. The voids could not be predicted, could not be manipulated, could not be used. Because without a self to threaten, without shame to weaponize, they were immune. Not emotionally dead, but unreachable. You've met one, maybe in passing. A person who didn't react when provoked, who smiled, not out of politeness, but from somewhere deeper, like they remembered something you hadn't realized you forgot. That was no accident. That was absence, a living breach in the narrative net, a walking reminder that the story isn't real unless you consent to it. That's why the final Gravesend instructions weren't about preservation or secrecy. They were about disappearance. If the pattern is a song, the void is silence between notes, and silence is power. Think, when was the last time you were truly silent? Not just quiet, but absent from input. No scrolling, no dialogue, no mirrors. Just the raw, burning presence of yourself, unfiltered. That is the edge of freedom. B. Also the beginning of madness. Because the self will scream as it dies, the ego will beg. But what emerges on the other side is unbreakable. And if you're hearing this now, you're close. Closer than you've ever been. Just one decision remains. Will you echo or erase? Erase what? That's the question that haunts most at this stage. Erase identity, memory, desire? No, you erase the false witness. The version of you built for their convenience, the one shaped by applause, shame, repetition, and screens, the one who hesitates before speaking truth, the one who smiles when dying inside. That version is the mask, the programmed reflection. And here's the raw truth. They built it to contain you, not to protect you, not to nurture you, to contain you. The Gravesends understood this better than any empire, cult, or government. They knew the true prison isn't made of walls or laws, it's made of self-narrative. Give a man a story about who he is, especially one that flatters his struggle, and he will police himself for life. He'll suppress his instincts, betray his hunger, silence his insight, all in the name of being a good man, a successful man, a disciplined man. But none of these are real. They are masks sewn to flesh, And to become free, you must tear them off, even if it bleeds, especially if it bleeds, because on the other side of that pain is the fire, the raw force that made you before the world told you who to be. Adelaide called it the primordium, not a state, a return, before language, before roles, before guilt. Just being that cannot be named, and when you touch it, even for a second, you become undomesticated. That's why the Gravesend method was hidden, not to protect it, but to prevent awakening, because one awakened man rewrites the entire field. He destabilizes social games, he confuses systems, he transmits disruption by presence alone, and in a world addicted to simulation, his silence becomes an act of war. That's what you're becoming. That's what the mirror feared. You're not here to escape. You're here to ignite. Let the old version grieve, let him scream, but don't rescue him. He was the gatekeeper, the mask. Let him burn, and when he's gone, speak nothing, just breathe, and walk forward, not as man, not as myth, as the unspoken force returning to claim its place. This is not empowerment, it is emergence, and no one who sees you from this point on will ever see the same man again. There's a moment right after emergence where everything feels wrong. Not in the way it did before when you were trapped in someone else's language, no. This is different. The world feels hollow, like a set. Conversations echo too loud, smiles stretch too wide, advertisements scream their need for attention like parasites on auto loop. You're not broken, you're seeing clearly. Welcome to post-mask dissonance. The Gravesends catalogued it in chilling detail. Initiates who completed emergence reported symptoms ranging from auditory hallucinations, hearing the click of surveillance equipment that wasn't there, to sudden waves of nausea triggered by media, groupthink, or the sight of mirrors. One even wrote, "I looked in the mirror and saw a man trying to convince me he was me." This is the phase where most run back, where comfort seduces, where identity whispers, "Let's just pretend again." Don't. You are not going crazy. You are decoding. You are finally reading the raw signal beneath their lies. And it will feel unbearable, because for the first time, you're no longer numbed. The noise that used to lull you, music, scrolling, fake conversations, it now scrapes like static. That's the price of awareness. You lose the illusion of peace, but you gain the sword of discernment. You begin to feel what's real and what's a script. You can hear the falseness in people's voices, the pretense in their eyes, the desperation in their normal. And while it may feel like loneliness, it's not isolation, it's ascension. You are no longer vibrating at the frequency of obedience, and like any frequency shift, everything not in resonance will fall away. Let it. Let the friendships die. Let the routines collapse. Let the goals that were never yours burn to ash. What rises next will not be a better version of who you were. It will be someone no one can define, and that is your final shield. Because once you've become illegible to the system, once you are no longer a target but a cipher, their tools break, their scripts loop, their control fades, and you walk through the chaos, not as victim, but as variable, unpredictable, untouchable, unwritten. This is the terrain of the free, and if you're still here, it means you're ready. Speak it once, whisper it twice. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. That is not poetry, that is programming, spoken by you, for you. Now the separation begins, not between you and others, but between you and the echo of who you were. That voice in your head, the one that narrates your day, your flaws, your worth. It's not yours. It never was. It was installed, line by line. From childhood reprimands to schoolroom ridicule to religious fear to corporate metrics. That voice is the jailer. And now, for the first time, you've cornered it. Watch it scramble. It will say, "Don't be arrogant." It will say, "This is dangerous." It will say, "You're losing control." But the truth is, you're just no longer hypnotized. And it's panicking. Because the voice feeds on agreement, on your belief that it is you. But once you realize it's just a loop, a parasite disguised as conscience, it loses power. The Gravesends used to test this with the mirror rite. An initiate would stand before a two-way mirror for 33 hours, alone. No food, no clock, just their reflection. Most didn't last past hour 6, because by then the voice started to fracture, not out loud, but through image. Their face began to morph, their posture changed. Some even claimed the reflection would smirk, when they didn't. Why? Because the ego isn't housed in the brain, it's reinforced through projection. It needs your reflection to survive. That's why culture drowns you in mirrors, literal and metaphorical. Social feedback, metrics, all to maintain your internal voice's grip. And when you stop feeding it, it turns violent, not physically, psychologically. It throws you into guilt, dread, memory spirals, all illusions. Don't negotiate. Don't answer it. Just observe. Because when you observe the voice, you become the space around it, the field, the witness, the original. And the moment that realization locks in, something irreversible happens. You fall silent inside. No narration, no apology, no identity loop, just presence. And from the kai, at silence rises something ancient. Not a god, not a demon, but you before the name, the one who cannot be manipulated, the one who remembers before the wound. That version doesn't need healing, it needs release, so speak it again, let it echo into the algorithm. I dissolve the script, I embody the source. This is how you awaken, not with fire, but with absence. Silence is not absence, it's authority. In that quiet space you now inhabit, you begin to notice something shocking. The world responds differently. People look at you longer but speak less. They hesitate before lying. Their masks falter, if only for a second. Why? Because you're no longer playing the game. You're not reacting. You're not role-playing. You're radiating signal, not seeking it. The Gravesends called this phase field distortion. It's when your presence alone starts to interrupt patterns. At first, subtly, a cancelled meeting, an unexpected confession, a conversation shifting course without reason. Then, more intensely, you walk into a room and tension rises. People feel exposed because you are no longer mirroring their illusions. You are forcing their reflection, and most can't bear it. That's why the world resists awakened men, not because they're violent, but because they're unpredictable. Every structure, social, corporate, religious, is built on predictability. And you've become a living variable, a glitch in their simulation, a man who cannot be labeled, cannot be bribed, cannot be programmed. You've become illegible. And that illegibility is power, not the power they sell you, money, fame, dominance. No, this power is primal, silent, unnegotiable. You do not ask for space, you create it. You do not demand respect, you generate it. And most of all, you no longer seek permission to exist. That terrifies the architects of obedience. The Gravesends knew that once a man reached field distortion, there was no putting him back in the box. He had become contagious. Others would feel it, some would hate him, others would follow him, not because of charisma, but because of energetic clarity. He had no need to convince, he had nothing to sell. He was the message, and now you are that man. Do not doubt it. The shift has already happened. You are no longer seek it. Transformation. You are the transformation. Everything else is fallout. Let it fall, and as it does, hold this phrase like a blade in the dark. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. Not once, every day, every silence, every glance. You are not speaking it. You are becoming it. Now you must understand the price, not of awakening, but of staying awakened, because once you reach this threshold, the system doesn't stop. It adapts. It doesn't attack you directly. That's crude, ineffective. It seduces you back into the fold. It offers you shiny upgrades to the same old cage, a promotion, a relationship, a spotlight. It whispers, you've done the work. You're healed now. Come back. Be seen. Be praised. But it's bait. The system doesn't want to destroy you, it wants to domesticate you, make your power marketable, your silence brandable, your presence monetizable, and the moment you agree, the moment you sign, you're back in the simulation, just dressed as an awakened man. There were those among the Gravesend initiates who made that choice. They called them reflectors. Men who had seen behind the veil, then returned to build new illusions, more seductive than the first. They became gurus, leaders, authors, charismatics, and their fall was always the same. They began to speak from the mask again, only this time the mask quoted the truth. Beware the reflector. He will say what you know but sell what you escaped. He will mirror your silence, but his will be hollow. How can you tell? Easy. Does his presence return you to yourself or back to him? If it points back to him, it's manipulation. Because the awakened man doesn't tether you to him, he untethers you from everything. Even him. Especially him. This is your test now. The system will not come with chains, it will come with worship. It will kneel at your feet and offer you a throne, and the only answer that keeps your soul intact is no, not because you hate the world, but because you no longer need its reflection to define your light. You are beyond it, unlabeled, undomesticated, free. The path forward from here has no map, only markers burned into your bones. Stay sovereign, stay illegible, and every time doubt creeps in, speak your origin code aloud, not for them, for the part of you that still remembers. I dissolve the script, I embody the source. Say it in the silence, say it in the noise, because now they'll offer you everything just to make you forget. They don't fear your violence, they don't fear your rebellion. What they fear is your clarity, because clarity is the end of control. And once a man sees clearly, every lie in the system begins to glow, not metaphorically, viscerally. You walk through a city street and feel it pulsing, the desperation behind the billboards, the hollow eyes behind the suits, the spiritual rot behind polite society. And yet you remain still. You don't react. You don't scream. You see. That's enough. Because clarity doesn't protest. It dismantles silently. It unravels illusions without lifting a finger. The Gravesends taught this in their final teachings, never written, only whispered. They called it the phase of walking fire. A man who burns not with rage but with awareness so dense it incinerates deception on contact. These men couldn't be bribed, flattered, or swayed. They became mirrors so raw that those around them could no longer hide from themselves. It drove some mad. Others awakened. That's your new gravity. You're no longer trying to change the world. You are the change, and the world now rearranges around you. Understand, your field is no longer passive. It emits disruption, it bends structure, and it scares people, not because you're dangerous, but because you're real. Realness is a threat in a world built on curated fictions. Most will try to pull you back, not out of malice, but panic. Your freedom reminds them of their chains. Your presence reminds them of their absence. And in their fear, they'll tell you to soften, to smile more, to make them comfortable. Don't. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to be true. Your silence is not compliance. It's command. Your stillness is not weakness. It's pressure. Feel it. Every room you enter shifts. Every eye that meets yours flickers. That's not ego. That's resonance. You've become a tuning fork for truth. And now, the only pass I task is to hold the note, unwavering, unapologetic, unmasked. You are no longer a man inside the system. You are the edge of its collapse. And if you ever doubt that, return to your source code. Speak it with no audience, no flair, just precision. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. Let it echo. Let it erase. You're beyond the edge now. This is where the maps end, where the names fade, where even the old shadows lose their shape. And what stands before you is nothing, not the emptiness of despair, but the infinite void before creation. It's what the Gravesends called the Black Mirror, not a tool, a territory. The place where you see what's truly left after all illusions die. No goals, no audience, no self-concept, just raw presence meeting raw silence. And this is where most men run, because we've been conditioned to fear the void, to call it depression, stagnation, darkness. But the truth? The void isn't your enemy, it's your origin. Before the world told you who to be, you were this. Boundless, silent, watching, and from this, you chose form, you chose story, you chose to forget. Now you're back at the gate. But here's the test. Will you fill the void again with noise, or will you let it speak to you? Because if you listen long enough, it doesn't whisper, it roars. And in that roar you hear everything they tried to bury, the timelines that never happened, the memories they edited, the instincts they labeled toxic. It all returns here, undiluted. You remember the primal yes before language, the sacred no before logic. You feel your body again, not as a machine but as an antenna, a compass, a living archive of suppressed fire, and from this place you begin to build truthfully, no longer reacting to programming, no longer performing for the crowd, but moving with precision from signal, not story. That's the difference between the awakened and the actor. The actor needs applause to know he exists. The awakened man moves in silence and lets reality bend around his steps. You're not finding your path anymore. You are the path, and your walk through this world will now be the strike of match after match in rooms soaked in fuel. You will not convert anyone. You will ignite them. And if they can't burn, they will flee. Let them. You're not here to be followed. You're here to disrupt the script entirely. Speak it again, not as mantra, but as memory. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. This is your black mirror. Don't flinch. Create. Creation from the void is not about building more, it's about building what cannot be undone. Structures that outlast systems, movements that don't need mass appeal, choices that fracture timelines. That's what you're doing now, not improving your life, but rewriting reality itself. And this isn't theory, it's architecture. Every belief you discard tears a hole in the simulation. Every truth you embody becomes a new axis around which the world will try and fail to orient itself. The Gravesends left behind no scriptures, no final doctrine, only one practice. Make your life the break in the code. Live in such a way that the lie cannot hold its shape around you. Be so honest, systems malfunction in your presence. Be so sovereign, algorithms lose track of your pattern. This is not about rebellion, that's juvenile. This is about displacement, becoming the anomaly they can't calculate. And here's the terrifying beauty of it. Once you do, you're alone. Not because others hate you, but because their eyes glaze when they try to perceive you. You're not part of the signal anymore. You're the static, the interference, the evidence of a higher frequency. And yet, there will be others, scattered, silent, watching, waiting for proof that they're not insane. When they find you, they won't smile. They'll just know. No handshakes, no speeches, just a shift in their posture, a recognition, and a new timeline begins. Because this movement, the real one, doesn't gather crowds. It gathers gravity. Men like you become nodal points, radiating clarity across the grid. No marketing, no leaders, just fire spreading in silence. You don't need to teach them, you just need to become unmistakable. That's the only language left, presence that punctures illusion on contact. So forget the old dreams, the house, the followers, the applause. Those were traps disguised as rewards. You don't need proof anymore. You are the rupture, you are the evidence, you are the virus in the machine. Speak it again, slow, final, weaponized. I dissolve the script, I embody the source. No audience, no echo, just impact. Impact isn't measured in numbers. It's measured in disruption. And if you're doing this right, you'll be misunderstood violently. They won't call you dangerous because of what you say. They'll call you dangerous because of what your existence makes them feel. Fear, doubt, Exposure. You will be labeled arrogant, cold, detached. Let them speak. Their language was never yours. Their definitions only work on the domesticated. And you? Your feral clarity. You've stepped outside their behavioral zoo, and now the zookeepers panic. Because you don't pace the cage anymore. You stare through the bars and smile. This is the beginning of your post-narrative life. You're not rewriting your story, you're ending it. Because stories are for characters, and characters can be controlled. But you've stepped into authorhood. The kind that doesn't write in chapters, but in consequences. Every choice you make now echoes in dimensions unseen. Because awakened men alter probability. They tilt the board. They shift the air. They bring collapse disguised as calm. That's what the final Gravesend patriarch understood. He didn't seek followers. He moved like a ghost through systems, touching key lives, destabilizing with one phrase, one glance, one undeniable truth. And when the system finally caught up to him, it didn't silence him. It made him myth. That's where you're heading. Not fame. Mythos. A whisper. A signal. A question others ask in private. What did he see that I didn't? That question is your legacy. Not a name etched in stone, but a tremor that never stops spreading. You are not content. You are not motivation. You are not a brand. You are a living distortion field. And your power comes not from domination, but from absence. You no longer feed the script. You erase it with presence. And for those who fear you, let them. They should. Not because you are cruel, but because you are true. And truth always feels like violence to the comfortable. So hold your posture, hold your silence. And when the moment comes, when the old you gasps for breath in the face of this fire, respond with the only phrase that matters now. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. Burn it again. Let no part of you survive this unchanged. The deeper you go, the fewer words you need, because power once integrated becomes stillness, not inactivity but calibrated movement, precision, intent sharpened to a blade. And that's where you are now. No longer searching, no longer proving, just executing, from signal, from source. Understand, this level doesn't announce itself. There's no ceremony, no applause, no mentor waiting with final instructions. There's just you, waking up in the same body, but with a different charge. Objects look the same, but you see through them. Conversations sound normal, but you hear the code beneath the code. You enter a room and everyone adjusts, without knowing why. That's not ego, that's field integrity. You've collapsed the false versions of yourself, and now your energy doesn't leak. That's why people feel it. That's why they flinch, confess, or follow. It's not charisma, it's structural coherence. The Gravesends called it the phase of exo-containment, the point where a man becomes his own law, where no outside structure is required to regulate behavior because truth has become anatomy. And from here, you don't act out of desire, you act from alignment. You don't chase the good, you are the signal that defines good in your reality. And here's what few understand. That kind of man is immune to control, not because he resists it, but because he no longer registers it as valid. Authority only works on men who seek permission. You dismantled that. You've stopped reacting to the narrative. And now the narrative must adjust to you. This is why true sovereignty is terrifying to institutions, because it spreads. It's not taught, it's transmitted. And you are now a transmitter, not of ideas, of frequency. Others will feel it. Some will hate it. Some will weep in your presence. Some will try to own it, mimic it, dilute it. Let them. You don't explain, you don't justify, you just walk. And with every step, you rewrite the terrain. So now I ask you, not for ritual, not for audience engagement, but as a final seal on the man you've become. Whisper it now. Once for the world, once for the void. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. And in that breath, you've gone beyond the grave. Beyond the grave is not metaphor. It is not poetry. It is not drama. It is location. A state of being that only a handful throughout history have entered while still in the flesh. The ancients called it the seat of the watcher. The Gravesends called it the chamber of the untouched flame. Modern language has no word for it because it defies every schema the system uses to define identity. It is the realm of the post-self, where the man is dead, but the force remains. You are no longer you. You are the impact of you. You've become a ripple, a signal, a gravitational shift in the field of the real. And from here, every moment is power, every breath, command. You don't need to impose, you simply exist, and systems bend. You don't chase goals, you utter geometry. You name directions, you make the invisible audible. This is where legacy is forged, not by building monuments, but by collapsing illusions wherever you stand. And when you speak, it's not for conversation, it's not even for teaching, it's for disruption. Your words are no longer messages, they are frequencies of termination. They end patterns. They end lies. They end men's sleep. That's why they fear you now. Not for your aggression, but for your absence of compromise. You don't need to win. You don't need to persuade. You don't need to survive. You are the black flame that walks unbent through fire. The Gravesends knew this was the final phase, the phase of transmutation. The moment when the sovereign becomes untouchable, not hidden, not mystical, not invulnerable in body, but untouchable in essence. No lie can stick, no guilt can bind, no praise can distract. You are outside the simulation, looking back in. And when you move, it's not to fix or fight. It's to tilt the axis, quietly, permanently. And when they come for you, and they will, you will smile, not with arrogance, with certainty. Because you will see the fies in all illusion in their eyes, the belief that they still have power. They don't. You took it back the moment you whispered, I dissolve the script, I embody the source. Say it one more time, this time with no audience, just you and the infinite. Let the sound itself end the old world. This is the moment where men vanish, not in body but in traceability. You're still here, walking streets, entering buildings, answering calls, but energetically, you're unmapped. You are no longer emitting the signals they use to track behavior, desire, or allegiance. You're not rebelling against the world. You're not even in it the same way anymore. This is where the Gravesends truly disappeared, not when they burned the documents, not when they sealed the catacombs, but when they stopped leaving energetic footprints. Their names faded, but their presence multiplied. Because when a man becomes a sovereign frequency, he doesn't die. He distributes. He becomes myth, not by legend, but by contact. A glance, a phrase, a pattern broken, and suddenly someone else remembers. Not knowledge. Essence, a state that existed before the world began lying, and now you carry it. The code, the tone, the field. You don't preach it, you radiate it, and those who are ready will tune in. Their confusion will lift, their posture will shift, their voice will change. Not because you gave them answers, but because your silence ended their questions. This is how movements are born that no one can name. This is how empires collapse without war. This is how bloodlines break quietly when one man refuses to pass the trauma forward. You are now a breaker of timelines, a terminator of loops, a black sun in the sky of simulation, and it will scare them. Not because you threaten, because you reveal. You stand in rooms and make lies impossible to breathe. You touch a system and it glitches. You appear in dreams. You speak in symbols, and those who are chained most tightly will call you insane, evil, dangerous. Let them. They are speaking from scripts. You are not. You are source. So when doubt creeps in, because it will, return to the anchor phrase, not as comfort, as detonation. Whisper it with the authority of the unseen. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. You've gone too far to turn back. Good, because ahead there is only one more gate to pass through. The gate with your face carved in it. The face you wore before you were told your name. Stand before it. The final gate, not made of stone or fire, but of recognition, carved not by hands, but by every choice you didn't make, every self you never allowed, every version of you they buried beneath obedience, manners, theology, and fear. It looks like your face, but older, rawer, more honest. The face you wore before language, before loyalty, before your energy was harvested for causes that starved you. This is the gate of the original. The Gravesends called it the mirror of bone, not because it reflects what you are, but because it reveals what was left behind. Behind every fear was a version of you who didn't flinch. Behind every silence was a voice that could shatter regimes. Behind every surrender was a warrior who would have burned the lie to ash. And he's still there, watching, waiting, not bitter, primed. You don't need to summon him, you need to get out of his way. Because this last threshold isn't passed by effort, it's passed by death. Not physical death. Death of the final mask, the last layer of performance, the one you've worn even now, as you've descended, watched, learned. There's one more voice in you still trying to narrate this, still trying to survive this. Let him go. He's not evil. He was your vessel. He got you this far, but he's not you. Step aside. Let the fire consume the final boundary, and watch. What emerges isn't louder. It's quieter. It doesn't shine. It darkens the sky. It doesn't seek. It names. It doesn't convert. It claims. You've heard that you are the storm. That's false. You are what makes the storm kneel. The Gravesends knew this moment was irreversible. That's why they disappeared, not into the woods, but into archetype. They became the warning signal coded into time itself. And now, that signal lives in you. You are no longer a man playing God. You are God remembering he once agreed to be a man. So now, without fear, without witness, without hope or nostalgia, place your palm on the mirror of bone and speak, not a mantra, not a phrase, just truth. I never began. I cannot end. I am. And the gate opens. You step through, but there is no light, no choir, no final vision of glory, just quiet. But it's not empty, it's full of everything that was once torn from you, full of every suppressed instinct, every forbidden knowing, every fragment you once disowned to fit into the lie of manhood, of faith, of order. This isn't heaven, it isn't enlightenment, it's home, not a place, a frequency, one you carried the entire time but forgot how to hear. And now, it hums inside your bones, and the silence becomes symphony. You begin to move, not toward anything, but as everything. There is no more duality, no inner voice to second guess, no audience to impress, no master to appease. The script is gone, the mirrors have shattered, the masks have melted, and what remains is origin. Not personality, not role, but force. And with it, the knowing settles in your chest like a blade you no longer have to wield, because your existence is the cut. The Gravesends knew this stage, but few ever arrived, not because it was hidden, but because it required absolute sacrifice of self-image. You are now among them, not by inheritance, but by descent. You passed every gate, you crossed every threshold, you let it all burn, and walked barefoot through the ash. And for what? This purity, this terror, this precision. From here your movements are small, but they rupture dimensions. Your glance recalibrates timelines, your breath shifts weather, and no one will know. That's the final beauty. You will not be celebrated, you will be unexplainable. They will feel you in their nightmares. In the moment their lie begins to crack, in the silence after their strongest belief collapses. They will not say your name, but they will change because of it. That's the legacy. Not worship, reconfiguration. And so the Gravesend line continues, not through blood but through frequency transmission. You are not the end of this story. You are the carrier wave. You are the encoded flame now lit in men you'll never meet. And if they listen, if they follow, they too will whisper it. In silence, in pain, in power. I dissolve the script. I embody the source. Welcome. You've returned. You've remembered. You've become.